Let me tell you a strange story. It begins with a tiny wooden comb pulled from the dirt of ancient Mesopotamia, worn, scratched, and unmistakably used on human skin. But not the scalp, not the beard, somewhere more private, a place that still makes scholars blush and politicians change the subject. Pubic hair. Too crude. Then I apologize, because you're about to embark on a journey through thousands of years of history, where the most private part of your body has, time and again, been the most tightly controlled. Where your body, specifically that little patch of it, may have never truly belonged to you. We grow up believing our bodies are free, that what we do with them is our personal choice. But ask the ancient Egyptian woman who spent her mornings boiling crocodile fat and fragrant resin into wax, just to be smooth before entering the temple. Ask the Roman girl curled up in a Pompeii brothel, judged by customers because she was too clean down there. Ask the women in concentration camps, forced to shave, not for beauty, but so power could strip them of their humanity. Ask them. You'll see. There's nothing personal about it. Hair, biologically irrelevant today, was once a political language. At one point, being hairy meant you were virtuous. At another, it meant you were savage. In one place, going bare was holy. In another, it was obscene. And strangely, the person whose body it was rarely got to decide. History doesn't like to record what's awkward, but it always leaves traces. On wooden combs, in satirical poetry, in religious laws, in paintings that never show pubic hair but still scream its presence. And in centuries of silence, where those without a say quietly obeyed what was called order. Today, we think we're freer. We shave, wax, laser, sugar scrub, and call it personal choice. But is it really, when ads, culture, beauty standards, and billions of dollars tell us what to do with our own skin? This is a hidden story. But it's not about desire. It's about power. Not about preference, but about social control. And the private parts, they were never truly private. They've always been on the front lines, where razors don't just cut hair, but carve out the line between freedom and control. Are you ready? The comb is in your hand now, and history, the real kind, doesn't shy away from going deep. Imagine waking up one August morning, somewhere along the banks of the Euphrates River, around 2300 BCE. The air is heavy with heat. A light breeze carries the scent of damp earth and donkey dung. You're not poor, obviously, because a pubic hair removal specialist has just knocked on your door bright and early. The Sumerians, founders of Mesopotamian civilization, had a lot of strange habits, but one of them became a norm: full-body shaving. Hair on your head, beard, armpits, legs, and of course, the pubic region. Not because they hated hair, but because they hated what hair represented: animalism, wildness, and slavery. Make no mistake, this wasn't about aesthetics the way we think of it today. Shaving didn't make someone sexier. Quite the opposite. A man with a hairy crotch was considered uncivilized. A woman with a full bush might as well be a goat herder from the Zagros Hills. Body hair signaled a lack of control, a disconnection from urban order, unfit for temple rituals or sitting beside the elite. In Babylon, being clean-shaven was a symbol. It said you belonged to the upper class, or at least had enough money to hire someone with a razor. It told the world you didn't have lice, because lice only clung to the dirty, the powerless, the neglected. So it's no surprise that razors became symbols of power. An ancient record from the city of Lagash tells the story of a young slave, his name lost to time but not his tale, who was harshly punished for using a razor without permission. He didn't steal food, he didn't run away, he didn't hit anyone, he simply shaved his pubes. To his master, that was rebellion. A man from the hairy class daring to claim the privilege of the smooth. A bottom-rung nobody trying to show up with a sleek body, as if he were on par with nobles. That was an insult. The record doesn't state his exact punishment. It just says, he was brought to the temple of Inanna, stripped, and had what was not his taken back. To Babylonians, that final line was a polite way of saying, it ended with a blade and a lot of blood. Shaving, in that world, wasn't just hygiene, it was political, a line in the sand between person and non-person. You could be a man, but if you weren't shaved, you were still a beast. You could be a woman, but if you didn't wax, you weren't worthy of love, marriage, or worship. And don't think this only applied to men. Elite women in Babylon were under even stricter pressure. A hairy body was seen as a sign of laziness, indulgence, and raw lust, all things that terrified men. So much so that there are records instructing temple prostitutes to be fully shaved before receiving clients, every single day. And the person who checked? An old woman appointed by the royal court. If she found one hair out of place, a bamboo stick would do the talking. Pubic hair, if left untouched, was seen as a threat to order. A single stray strand could be interpreted as a crack in civilization. From Mesopotamia, this practice floated down the Nile, where the ancient Egyptians took it to a whole new level. Shaving was not just social, but sacred. In Egypt, royal mummies have preserved some strange details. The skin around their pubic region shows no trace of hair, not from time, but because it had been waxed before death. Why? Because Egyptians believed that in order to pass through the gates of the afterlife, your soul had to be purified of earthly dirt. And in their worldview, dirt began with hair. Pubic hair was the first to go during the elite's funeral cleansing rituals. And in life, upper-class Egyptians kept ornate cosmetic boxes, carved from ebony, inlaid with gold, sometimes shaped like dolphins, filled with waxes made of crocodile fat, aromatic resins, and quicklime. These mixtures were heated, smeared on the skin, and ripped off. Painful, absolutely, but beautiful, clean, divinely correct. Cleopatra, if the more mysterious records are true, likely had her body completely waxed, not to seduce anyone, as Hollywood likes to suggest, but to present herself as the living embodiment of the goddess Isis. A goddess with no hair, because divinity needed no trace of animal instinct. But then the story takes an odd turn, in the quiet halls of temples, monasteries, and women's cloisters. Unlike the nobles, Egyptian priestesses were not allowed to shave. For them, leaving the body untouched, hair and all, was a sign of purity and natural order. To shave, in their view, was to interfere with a divine gift. This was one of ancient Egypt's strange cultural contradictions. The same religion, the same beliefs, but two different female bodies. One waxed smooth like a statue of a goddess. The other left hairy as proof of devotion. Modern historians still debate this, but one compelling theory suggests this. Powerful women had to control their bodies, so they shaved. Submissive women weren't allowed to change anything, so they stayed natural. The body, once again, was no longer yours. So, what if you only shaved halfway? There's no clear answer. Maybe people would call you a hypocrite, pretending to be pious while clinging to bodily control. Maybe you'd be seen as half beast, half divine, unfit to be queen or nun. Or maybe you'd just be quietly ignored, living a life somewhere in the middle, trapped between two extremes society built for you. Sounds distant, honestly. Not that different from today. Ask anyone who's ever sat in a waxing chair. How much hair is just enough? Go fully bare, you're called slutty. Leave it wild, you're gross. Somewhere in between, what is that? And more importantly, who gets to decide? From Babylon to Egypt, From wooden razors to crocodile fat wax pots, the story keeps repeating. Pubic hair was never just about pubic hair. It's how power lays claim to the body and says, "This belongs to me." When the Greeks taught the world how to think, the Romans taught it how to shave, not to become gods, but to shape or destroy an image if needed. In the contradictory and calculated world of ancient Rome, where everything from your beard to your gait could be politicized, the patch of hair between your legs, invisible to the public eye, played a surprisingly big role in defining whether you were a virtuous man or a ridiculous weakling. Strangely enough, Roman elites were obsessed with waxing. Chest, waxed, armpits, waxed, legs, smooth as a dolphin. A man with hairy armpits, considered a barbarian. Hairy legs, a backward stonecutter from the hills. Julius Caesar himself was mocked for being as hairless as a Greek dancer, and he didn't bother denying it. For the upper class, that was the ideal. But waxing the pubic region, that was a different story. For a respectable Roman man, shaving everything down there was seen as effeminate, weak, even suspicious. A body too clean, especially the area that was supposed to exude masculine virility, but instead looked like a baby's bottom. Dangerous. That smoothness suggested indulgence. It was a sign of a playboy, a male prostitute, or an untrustworthy politician. Juvenal, the brilliant and vicious satirical poet, once mocked a powerful Roman statesman in his verses for shaving his groin like a Greek whore. No one said who it was, but everyone got the message. Juvenal didn't care if the man had lied to the people, stolen money, or betrayed allies. The real disgrace. He'd shaved the one part that should have screamed real man. In a society built on the ideal of virtues, meaning masculine virtue, courage, integrity, waxing the pubes wasn't just about grooming. It was a rebellion against order. A man who was smooth down there had, quite literally and figuratively, lost his edge. And yet, there were those allowed, even expected, to do it. Enter the gladiator prostitutes, a bizarre class of Roman society. These weren't the movie gladiators who fought to the death. They fought to seduce. In the arena, they sold strength. Outside it, they sold something else. Their bodies, waxed head to toe, were the merchandise. No one blamed them. Because they lived in a separate world, a world where morality no longer applied. They were beautiful animals for the public to enjoy. No one trusted them, but everyone watched them. They lived in the grey zone, where a hairless groin was both a symbol of power and a silent judgment. If Roman men were caught in a tension between cleanliness and credibility, Roman women were trapped in a far stranger maze, to shave or not to shave. That was a matter of both sex and politics. On the walls of Pompeii, the city buried in ash but preserved in perfect detail, countless erotic drawings remain, each one a window into real Roman life. And strangely, the women in these images have no pubic hair. Not because the artists didn't know how to draw it. They painted every fold of cloth, every bun of hair, every splatter of semen. But pubic hair, rarely, if ever, depicted. Women in Pompeii's erotic art are smooth, sensual, almost unreal. And so, most historians believe. In Roman brothels, women were expected to be completely waxed. It was an unwritten rule, a standard of pleasure. In a world where Roman men were both drawn to smooth femininity and terrified of it, women became the mirrors of that contradiction. They weren't free to choose their own bodies. They had to wax to be desirable, but wax too much. They were suspected of being prostitutes. Don't wax at all. Seen as unkempt. Wax just the right amount? Sorry, no one ever defined what right was. Oddly, among the Roman aristocracy, the expectations flipped. There, Pubic hair was seen as a sign of virtue and maturity. A noblewoman who appeared too clean was thought to lack dignity. Hair, in their view, was a gift from nature, proof of a grown, respectable woman who didn't titillate men with bare skin or slippery perfection. A good wife kept her body natural. No waxing, no trimming, no bleaching. A Roman matron with pubic hair was considered untouched, both physically and morally. That's why the scandal of Julia, wife of Emperor Tiberius, was so explosive. Julia was accused of adultery, already a crime for imperial women. But what shocked the public more was a whisper that she had waxed her pubic region. No paintings, no proof, just murmurs that her body no longer looked natural. That was enough. No witnesses, no lovers needed. A smooth groin alone was proof she was a harlot. Tiberius exiled her to an island. No public trial. People whispered, "A woman with no pubic hair has no honor." You might think that's absurd, but in a society where every strand of hair was a symbol, shaving it off was rebellion. Roman women had no choice. In brothels, they were forced to shave. At home, they were forced not to. And in bed, whether with husband or lover, they were expected to be both smooth and virtuous. An impossible task. A game with rules that changed based on status and who was looking. There are ancient letters, few, but surviving, written by former slaves or freed sex workers. In them, women wrote things like, "I let it grow back after years of being bare and naked like a marble statue." Faded lines, but heavy with meaning. To grow hair again, for them, was a way to reclaim their dignity. In a world where everyone believed pubic hair existed to be seen, or judged by others, keeping it, or shaving it, was never just a personal choice. From Juvenal to Julia, from Pompeii to the emperor's bedroom, Rome proved a strange truth. Waxing, something seemingly small, could change a person's fate, career, even history. A politician who shaved the wrong place might lose his seat. A queen who waxed too far might lose her crown. A courtesan who let it grow might lose her clients. And a whole society, in the act of shaving, trimming, waxing and hiding, exposed something raw and undeniable. The pubic region was never off limits. It was a battlefield, and every time someone shaved, they chose a side. If Rome turned waxing into a game of power, the medieval Islamic world treated pubic hair removal as a sacred moral act. Not because they were chasing beauty, but because they believed cleanliness is a part of faith. Strange as it may sound, it's true. In the hadiths, the collected sayings and actions of the Prophet Muhammad, there's a line so frequently cited that it's almost second nature. Remove pubic hair, pluck armpit hair, trim nails and moustache. Do not neglect them for more than 40 nights. It's not a command, but it's a sunan, an act encouraged in imitation of the Prophet. And for devout Muslims, a sunan isn't up for debate. It's a way of life. So the razor became a moral tool. In homes from Baghdad to Cairo, from Granada to Samarkand, people passed down techniques for proper shaving, how to heat the water, how to oil the skin to avoid irritation, even how to use a small mirror to check every last spot, just to ensure nothing remained that might displease God. Shaving wasn't just a private act, it became a ritual. Bathe, rinse your nose, trim your nails, shave your pubic hair, and if you skipped that last one, or did them out of order, you might be seen as spiritually lazy. This reveals a deep contrast with other cultures. The Romans waxed to be admired. The Egyptians waxed to be divine. Muslims shaved to please the Creator. And they did it not because others might see, but because they believed God always sees. Some religious scholars even debated this. If someone dies without shaving, have they truly cleansed themselves to meet God? That seemingly small question appears in actual 11th century theological texts. because for them, a clean body reflects a clean soul, and vice versa. But if cleanliness is part of faith, what happens if you don't shave? You might think it's a personal matter. It wasn't. In the dusty pages of Sharia, traditional Islamic law, there are bizarre cases of divorce. One man went to a Sharia court in Damascus and declared he could no longer live with his wife because she had been neglecting to shave for 2 months. The judge asked, "Do you love her?" The man replied, "Yes, but the smell and the sight. I feel nothing anymore." And he was granted a legal divorce because his wife had neglected bodily hygiene, which is considered a marital duty under religious law. It sounds like a modern breakup story, but it wasn't. It happened in the 13th century, and it wasn't an isolated case. Across legal records from Andalusia, Egypt, and Iran, you'll find many similar disputes, women and men accused of moral failure simply for not shaving on time, not for lust, not for adultery, just for having hair past the acceptable limit. Morality in this world was no longer about the heart. It was about anatomy, but this harsh code wasn't applied equally. Ironically, in that same world, there existed an opposite rule for those who weren't allowed to shave. Courtesans, dancers, female servants working in haram spaces, private areas reserved for elite men. Why? Because in certain Islamic dynasties, especially under the Abbasids and Ottomans, religious authorities feared one thing: if courtesans were as clean-shaven as the devout wives, what was left to distinguish them? So they issued unwritten codes, sometimes even formal bans. Prostitutes were not allowed to shave completely. They had to leave some hair, as a sign, a symbol, a boundary between the faithful and the outside. Some Sufi poets, mystics who were also hopeless romantics, mocked this double standard with biting irony. One once wrote, "I care not who she is. I only look below. If I find smoothness, I call her wife. If I find a forest, I know I've lost my way." No one knows if this was a hymn or a dirty joke, but it captures a clear truth. In medieval Islamic society, pubic hair wasn't just biology, it was ID, a marker of faith, morality, and social class. And as in many other societies, women, once again, were caught between two poles. If she was a wife, she had to be clean. But not too clean, or she might be seen as promiscuous. If she was a courtesan, she had to be hairy, but not too hairy, or she'd be unattractive. If she was a palace dancer, like the famous odalisques, her body had to be soft, fragrant, smooth, but not fully clean, because total cleanliness was a privilege of royal wives, not slaves. Like an impossible equation, every strand of hair became political. To shave or not to shave was no longer a personal choice. It was something society placed on you, then judged you by. In religious sermons across major cities in the medieval Islamic world, preachers would often emphasize, the believer in Allah must be clean, like a soldier before battle. Then they'd go on about washing hands, rinsing the face, plucking armpit hair, and shaving pubic hair. No shame, no embarrassment. It wasn't a secret, it was public knowledge, because they believed God sees everything, and He judges even what no one else can see. A small mirror, a worn-out razor, an ancient hadith, a divorce over a missed shave, and an entire moral system balanced on a few stray hairs between your legs, something the Romans, Egyptians, and medieval Muslims all knew. It was never just a small matter. From the Islamic deserts to the moss-covered churches of Europe, we witness a very different kind of obsession with the pubic region. One no longer driven by notions of cleanliness or sanctity, but by fear. Fear of desire, fear of lust, and strangely enough, fear of shaving. In the Middle Ages, People didn't wax to seduce, didn't shave to be tidy, and didn't keep things natural out of choice. They were bound by a bizarre ideology. Every hair was a scar left by original sin. It all began with a woman named Eve. According to the interpretation of clergy at the time, because Eve tempted Adam to bite the forbidden fruit, the shameful part of her body, the source of temptation, had to be punished, and that punishment was hair. Pubic hair became the living symbol of sin, described by the church as a wilderness of lust that had to be hidden beneath thick cloth, iron girdles, and a constant sense of shame. But here's where the paradox begins. On one hand, preachers proclaimed that women must not shave, for smooth skin was seductive. It caused men to sin in their hearts. Shaving, in their view, was an act of self-seduction, a step toward damnation. On the other hand, they also taught that pubic hair was filthy, a reminder of fleshly corruption, something that made women inherently unholy. Don't shave. You're lustful. Shave. It's still lustful. And as always, the woman had no way out. Thus, from the 10th to the 14th centuries, the pubic region became a moral battleground. No one was allowed to speak of it, yet everyone was judged by it. In monasteries, women had to wear long gowns and head coverings day and night, not just for virtue's sake, but because it was believed that every strand of hair on the head or the body was a siren call for Satan. One priest even wrote in a liturgical text, "When the woman sleeps, Satan lies between her legs and whispers." Then he stopped writing. But everyone understood what was left unsaid. Medieval physicians, who understood almost nothing about anatomy, only added to the strangeness. In a handwritten medical text kept at Reichenau Abbey, there's a warning. Women must not completely shave their pubic hair, because it helps preserve the body's natural heat and prevents the loss of female essence. They believed that during intercourse, women released a kind of mysterious female fluid. And if there were no pubic hairs, that fluid would evaporate. This, they thought, would make women melancholic, damage their wombs, even render them infertile. So hair, preached as sinful, was also seen as medicinal, and the razor, symbol of cleanliness elsewhere, became an instrument of bodily ruin. In this world, a woman's body was shackled by two chains, one forged by the church, the other by pseudo-medicine, and in between, silence, fear, and the musty smell of woolen garments that covered every inch from neck to ankle, not to keep warm, but to protect chastity from the eyes of God above the altar. Then time passed, and something strange happened. Art began to bloom, and with it, the pubic region returned, in paint. During the Renaissance, the 15th and 16th centuries, people began to view the human body not as a nest of sin, but as a divine masterpiece. Artists like Botticelli, Raphael, and Michelangelo created nude figures that were celebrated, even in churches. But of course, there was an unspoken rule. Pubic hair must not be shown. The body was idealized, clean, smooth, with no hair anywhere. Face, armpits, arms and pubic area, everything rendered as soft and waxy as candlelight at midnight mass. Female angels, or Greek goddesses, were often strategically covered by fabric, a hand, a rose, or a seashell. But sometimes they weren't covered at all, and when that happened, the pubic region appeared as flat and smooth as if pubic hair had never existed. This wasn't because the artists were naive. It was because they followed an aesthetic ideal of the time. Beauty meant purity. A beautiful woman showed no signs of the flesh, no folds, no wrinkles, and no hair. Hair was too natural. And in the hands of clergy or aristocrats, the natural was often seen as dirty. But art always finds its rebels. And the first painter to rebel with pubic hair may have been Agnolo Bronzino, a 16th century Italian artist. In one strangely provocative painting, Bronzino painted a fully nude goddess. No flowers, no shells, no veils. And in the place where artists usually looked away, he painted a few wispy pubic hairs. Not to titillate, but to say, women are not angels, they are human, and their bodies do not need to apologize. Although Bronzino was never charged with heresy, that painting remained hidden for centuries. It sat quietly in archives, like a whisper beneath the loud sermons. This is real, and real is not always clean. Other artists began to follow: Titian, Giorgione, later Goya, Courbet. Each added brushstrokes that brought pubic hair back into art, not as a symbol of lust, but as a declaration of the natural right to exist. And so, from damp monasteries to sunlit Venetian studios, from medieval guilt to Renaissance revival, Europe had come full circle. From forbidding shaving to forbidding depiction, then from refusal to look to finally capturing it on canvas. Yet whether the painting showed hair or not, one thing remained unchanged. Women never got to decide for themselves. Their pubic hair was managed by theology, shaped by aesthetics, judged by medicine, and, ironically, sometimes celebrated as a symbol of liberation. But only in paintings. In real life, razors remained taboo, and the pubic region stayed a silent repository for sin. If the Middle Ages were an age of fear, where body hair was seen as a mark of sin, then Versailles under Louis XIV was a place where everything melted. 17th century French society seemed to dissolve in the golden glow of crystal chandeliers, thick clouds of perfume, the whisper of silk, and the soft, high-pitched rip of hot beeswax being torn from human skin. Louis XIV, the Sun King, didn't just build a palace. He created an aesthetic universe where every inch of the human body was political. Dirty fingernails were an insult to the king. Tangled hair was disrespectful. And a stray pubic hair could mark the end of one's courtly standing. Versailles became one grand stage where the nobility performed their refinement through even the tiniest gestures. They scraped their tongues, powdered their heels, and of course waxed their entire bodies with pure beeswax. The wax was melted in silver trays, tested on the wrist, then spread across the groin, armpits, chest, buttocks. No area was off limits. And it wasn't just women, men waxed too. If you didn't wax, if you couldn't control your own body, you were considered too crude to attend the king's ball. Some noble women wouldn't leave their chambers without their personal waxer. This person, often another woman, knew every intimate inch of her client's body. But here's the twist. She wasn't just a waxer. She was a listener, a collector of secrets. Some records suggest these personal waxers were, in fact, spies, hired by noble wives to gather intel on their husbands' mistresses. Once again, the pubic region became a political center, a crossroads of power, sex, and control. But no dynasty lives forever by candlelight. When the French Revolution roared to life and waxed clean heads began to fall from the guillotine, the entire world of perfumes and hot wax vanished with them. And when the English, especially the Victorians, stepped into the heart of European power, they brought with them a completely new philosophy: discretion. Unlike Versailles, where the body was a glittering political artifact, 19th century England believed the body should be hidden. Victorian women were expected to keep their backs straight, eyes downcast, and never show more than an ankle. Social scrutiny was so intense that even the phrase table leg was considered suggestive. Tablecloths were draped all the way down to the floor, for fear that male guests might be aroused by the curves of carved wood. In such a climate, the idea of pubic waxing was, of course, unspeakable. And yet, it didn't disappear. It simply vanished from public conversation. Behind the discreet ebony drawers of London's elite salons, tools from France were still being used. Gold-plated tweezers, delicately engraved razors, tiny pots of honey wax, coded with euphemisms like épilation d'ombre, cleaning the shadows, or pommade de l'élégance. Victorian ladies never admitted to waxing, but they did, silently, privately, in their dressing rooms, behind heavy doors and the soft sounds of piano music. There were even secret manuals circulated among aristocratic women, detailing recipes for homemade wax creams made of beeswax, rose water, and something called divine goat's milk, which frankly, no one really knew the origin of. Why did they do it? Because Victorian morality demanded that a woman's body be pure, but not rough. Clean, so long as no one knew how it got that way. The private grooming became a silent form of power. Victorian men never dared ask their wives if they waxed. Yet if a woman was rumoured to wax like a French girl, her family's honour could crumble. On the flip side, if, on the wedding night, a husband found things too wild, she'd be branded unclean, like a servant. Wax and be judged. Don't wax and still be judged. This impossible double bind turned Victorian women into masters of waxing in the shadows. No salons, no groans, no personal waxers like in Versailles, just silence, skill, and tiny red marks hidden beneath layers of lace and petticoats. The bitter truth, that very Victorian ideal, so outwardly moral, but inherently controlling, spread across the globe via colonialism. The British marched into India, Africa, Southeast Asia, bringing churches, guns, laws, and their ideas about women's bodies. In their eyes, native women, with darker skin, tangled hair, and often untrimmed pubic regions, were wild, and therefore in need of civilizing. They built English-style girls' schools, where local girls were forced into long skirts, straight postures, and taught to wax. Historical documents describe personal hygiene training in colonial boarding schools in India, where British teachers instructed native girls on how to manage regions that must not be named. Once again, pubic hair removal was no longer a choice. It became a global moral standard. And perhaps the greatest irony, the British women who enforced that standard weren't even allowed to speak of their own grooming rituals. Done every week, in silence, behind closed doors. The control didn't lie in the skin, it lay in the silence. From the opulence of Versailles to the hushed parlours of London, from steaming beeswax to gilded razors hidden in jewellery boxes, pubic waxing wasn't just about beauty. It was a declaration of power, class, gender, and control. But it was never, at least not in that era, a declaration made by women for themselves. They waxed, not for comfort, but to conform. They waxed, not for freedom, but to avoid whispers. And for nearly 2 centuries, women's private parts were liberated from hair, only to be imprisoned in unspoken expectations. History doesn't always shift with the sound of gunfire. Sometimes it changes with a soft, almost imperceptible swish when a razor blade brushes against skin. In 1915, amid war, flu pandemics, and floor-length dresses, Gillette quietly released an unprecedented product, a razor made specifically for women. They called it the Milady Décolleté, a name that sounded more like a luxury perfume than a shaving tool. But this wasn't meant for the nose. It was for the armpits. Women in the 1910s had never seen an ad so blunt about their bodies. Harper's Bazaar printed a full-page image of a woman in a sleeveless dress, arm raised high, with a small caption, "Nothing is more alluring than a lady with nothing to hide, not even under her arms." No one said it out loud, but everyone understood. Under her arms didn't just mean the armpits. With a single twist of the wrist, Gillette set off a quiet but radical revolution. Not with guns, but with the idea that a modern woman must be clean. Not just clean, smooth. Not just smooth, silky. Everywhere. And from that moment on, every strand of hair on a woman's body became a problem to solve. Shaved armpits were polite. Shaved legs were elegant. And the pubic area, never spoken of, but increasingly understood to be hairless. What's strange is that the blade didn't just cut skin. It severed something deeper, the connection between women and their right to choose what to do with their own bodies. Ads weren't just selling razors anymore. They were selling guilt. If you didn't shave, you were backward. If you weren't smooth, you didn't deserve that new dress. If you had hair, you weren't feminine enough. Gillette didn't need to force anyone. They just had to plant the question in your head. Why aren't you shaving? Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, a very different system was also erasing hair, but for far darker reasons. When the Nazis rose to power in the 1930s, they didn't just want to control territory. They wanted to control bodies, down to the smallest detail. In concentration camps, millions were herded into rooms, stripped of their clothes, and shaved head to toe. No choice, no aesthetic reason, just the stripping away of humanity. Hair gone, names gone, memories gone. People became objects. Jewish women were left naked, shaved, lined up on conveyor belts of horror. And they knew, from that moment on, they were no longer themselves. Hair removal, once a symbol of luxury, had become a tool of dehumanization. The irony, no, the cruelty, is that upper-class Nazi women, like Magda Goebbels, practiced meticulous waxing. They waxed, not for fashion but for ideology. The pure Aryan body in their minds had to be white, flawless, smooth. Not even a single stray pubic hair could belong to another race. At that point, cleanliness wasn't hygiene. It was a weapon of ideology. Jews, Romani people, homosexuals, they were shaved to humiliate. Aryan women waxed to prove racial superiority. Same act, different blade. Under fascism, hair removal stopped being cosmetic. It became suppression, wrapped in beeswax and eugenics. And then the war ended. But the razor and the ideals it carried remained sharp. In post-war 1950s, America, prosperity brought new ads, pastel colors, flared skirts, and women with curled hair shaving their legs with gentle smiles. But those smiles weren't from joy. They were silent orders. Be cheerful when you wax. Hollywood played its part. When stars like Marilyn Monroe and Elizabeth Taylor appeared with flawless white skin, no one asked, how far did they wax? But every woman understood. To be loved, you had to be hairless. Never before had shaving been so political. Men's magazines like Playboy began defining the ideal woman. Smooth from chest to heel. And while no one dared name the pubic area, words like clean, tidy, and neat crept into the sexual vocabulary. Even during the Cold War, body hair became a measure of civilization. Soviet women, with their rough, masculine appearance, were mocked in US media. American women, sleek, clean, soft, were heralded as the pinnacle of freedom and feminism. A twisted paradox. American women had to shave to prove they were free. Then came the 1960s and 70s. The first wave of feminism arrived, and with it, a surprising demand. Let the hair grow back. Women like Gloria Steinem, Angela Davis, and members of the Red Stockings stood up against the pressure to shave. They grew out their armpit hair, leg hair, sometimes even pubic hair, not out of laziness, but as a political statement. It was their way of saying, I am me, not a product of advertising. Shaving or not shaving, they argued, must be a choice, not a silent obligation. But the market didn't give up easily. The beauty industry, having created the need, now offered solutions: cold wax, hair removal creams, pink razors, and of course, ads attacking from every angle. Even as women demanded the right to grow hair, pop culture pushed back. Hairy women were mocked as gross, unattractive, or probably lesbians. At that point, the battle wasn't just about shaving. It was about who controls the story around body hair. From a drip of wax in Versailles to the razors of Auschwitz, from the Milady blade to Venus sensitive, from Victorian silence to Berkeley protests, pubic hair has never been just about hygiene. It's a hidden history, a secret map of power, desire, politics, and profit. Some were shaved to be degraded. Some were pressured to shave to be loved. Some waxed for freedom. Others because ads told them, real women don't have hair. And today, in the 21st century, when you step into the shower and pick up a razor, you're continuing a legacy no one ever taught in school. The question isn't to shave or not to shave. It's who decides and why. Late in the 1960s, when Marlboro smoke drifted through anti-war cafes and long flowing hair blanketed the squares of Berkeley, a strange but also perfectly natural movement quietly began on women's bodies. Hair started growing back. Not because they forgot, but because they remembered. Remembered that they were once forced to shave. Remembered that cleanliness had once been defined by men and by razors. In those years when the slogan, "The personal is political," was stitched into banners, even the most private parts became a battleground. Women of the second wave feminist movement didn't need picket signs to make a statement. They just stopped waxing. Hair became a declaration, something that both defied and liberated. Patti Smith raised her arm on stage, letting her armpit hair flicker under the lights. Madonna, between songs about body autonomy, deliberately left it unshaven. Not because she forgot her spa appointment, but because history needed remembering. They didn't keep their hair because they loved it, but because they were exhausted from having to ask permission to be themselves. Hair grew like roots breaking through concrete, proof of an identity no longer willing to be landscaped by Playboy or Gillette. And like all acts of rebellion, it was quickly outlined, framed, and sold by pop culture. By the 21st century, razors were no longer sharp metal objects. They had become pixels. Bodily control no longer came from clinics or churches, but from LED lights and algorithms. A 15-year-old girl scrolls through TikTok, sees bodies filtered, hairless, labeled clean, and begins to believe that what's natural on her own body is wrong. The internet doesn't command, it suggests. But those suggestions repeat like scripture until they become belief. And like all religions, this one rewards and punishes. Don't shave. Get mocked. Shave everything. Get likes. The phrase clean girl aesthetic no longer refers to your face. It refers to every patch of unseen skin, an invisible cleanliness that's nonetheless mandatory. Some cosmetic clinics now report rising numbers of labiaplasty procedures because young girls believe their genitals don't look right. And where does that standard come from? Retouched images, porn body wash commercials. How to do a proper Brazilian wax videos with 2 million views and lo-fi beats in the background. Strangely, in this so-called age of freedom, where everyone supposedly owns their body, the very definition of that ownership is being pre-written. People say, "I shave because I like to," without ever questioning where that preference came from. And if you don't shave, you're asked, "Why are you so messy?" Not shaving is crude. Shaving is fake. Trapped between these two extremes, a woman's body is no longer a refuge. It's a disputed territory. And then, in an ironic twist, just when you think you've broken free from the old standard, a new one is already waiting. not shaving becomes a trend. Pubic hair is reclaimed as a cultural symbol. Some keep it for art. Others post images of natural bodies as acts of defiance. But even in rebellion, your body is still watched, hashtagged, commented on, turned into content. To shave or not to shave, both now risk becoming performance. So does freedom, if it only exists on a screen. And the old question, once thought outdated, returns, sharp as the razor in your bathroom. Who's deciding, and why are we listening to them? If you ever thought that pubic hair grooming was just a personal, private matter, not worth talking about, well, now you know. It was never just about the razor. It's a chapter in the grand human saga of struggling with the body, with control, with power, and with shame dressed up in perfumed wax. From ancient Mesopotamia, where slaves were forbidden to shave, to sex workers who were banned from waxing in the name of public morality. From Cleopatra, cleansing herself like a goddess using crocodile fat, to French noblewomen secretly hiring waxers for fear of scandal. These are stories you won't find in textbooks, yet they weave through the very fabric of history. Your body was supposed to be yours, but religion had opinions, so did the state, and now the beauty industry joins in. A patch of hair could decide who you were, a loyal wife or a lady of the night, a model citizen or a rebellious threat, a noblewoman or just another peasant. And today, in an era we proudly call free, where you can supposedly define yourself, paradox hits harder than ever. Is the right to do what you want truly yours, or just an old script dressed in modern branding? We shave because we're used to it. We don't shave to resist. But either way, the body remains under scrutiny. History still whispers from behind the bathroom mirror. Pubic hair was never a small thing. It's a code of the times, a map of power, a scar from battles fought without bullets, but leaving wounds deeper than steel. And remember, when society starts obsessing over whether or not you have hair down there, it's probably not about hygiene. It's about control.